are watching the world 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Let's begin with the top stories you need to know. Pakistan's new government is hoping to inject some fresh momentum into projects that fall under China's Belt and Road Initiative as they try to boost their troubled economy. Pakistan is looking at joint ventures for renewable energy projects, agriculture collaboration, and possibly enticing some Chinese companies to relocate to Pakistan as per officials. An Egyptian soldier has been killed in an incident involving Egyptian and Israeli troops in the border area near Rafah. Tensions between Egypt and Israel have heightened since Israeli forces took control of the Gazan side of the Rafah crossing point 3 weeks ago. An Israeli airstrike triggered a fire that killed 45 people in a tent camp in Rafah, prompting an outcry from global leaders who urged the implementation of a world court order to halt Israel's assault. This as the Israeli Prime Minister called the country's deadly strike on Rafah a tragic mistake. Well, at least 23 people have been killed in a series of powerful storms that have swept across the central and southern United States, leaving a trail of destruction and devastation. Elon Musk's artificial intelligence startup XAI has raised $6 billion to accelerate its challenge to his former allies at OpenAI. Well, a big focus. According to a report, Pakistan is hoping to inject some fresh momentum into projects that actually fall under China's Belt and Road Initiative as it tries to boost the country's troubled economy. Pakistan is looking at joint ventures for renewable energy projects, agriculture collaboration, and possibly attracting some Chinese companies to relocate to Pakistan. This is what Ehsan Iqbal, Pakistan's Federal Minister for Planning, Development and Special Initiatives, who also actually co-heads the committee responsible for the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, has said on record. Pakistan is the world's largest host of Belt and Road Initiative projects, with the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor involving $62 billion in spending. Reports, in fact, suggest that China has provided developing countries with over $1.1 trillion in loans through its Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, reports say that 80% of the loans involve countries in financial distress like Pakistan. Gauri Dwivedi is tracking the latest developments for us. She joins us live at the moment. Gauri, a rather interesting development as we were discussing. It comes a fortnight after India signed a long-term lease for equipping and operating the strategic Iranian port of Chabahar. Right, Gauri, you seem to be on mute.
Apologize for that, Parmeshwar. A lot of this is due to the fact that there are compulsions driving this initiative and resurgence of that entire initiative once again on both sides. On Pakistani sides, remember, there is dire strait as far as the economic situation is concerned. They've just managed to get fresh lease of life of another $3 billion from IMF, but there are serious downside risks that have been pointed out by the IMF to the Pakistani economy. Now, in that situation, revival of BRI and getting fresh funding from China for its CPEC projects is really the best bet that Pakistan has right now. On China's side, remember, they've been also, the reason why CPEC is so important for China is that it allows them to, of course, create a major counter as far as India is concerned. So that's the reason why both sides want CPEC to get a fresh lease of life. Now, of course, it comes after India has been able to sign Chabahar port. And for China, it makes sense to get the Gwadar port going once again. There are a lot of reasons why the project in the last 10 years has faced enough and more of hurdles. First being the fact that the Pakistani population there is deeply resentful of Chinese investments because they feel these are investments that are only helping Chinese companies, Chinese contractors, Chinese employees, and not helping the Pakistani population. And the second is there is still no answer from the Pakistani side to Chinese questions of how do you provide security to the projects that are already on ground, given the fact that there have been multiple attacks, one as recently as a couple of weeks back.
As always, Gauri, thank you so much for taking us through the latest developments and contextualizing the story for us. For further clarity on the matter, we also have Michael Kugelman joining us live from Washington, D.C. at the moment. Michael, always a pleasure to speak to you. It's not a secret that lenders like China extract their pound of flesh, as they did in leasing a substantial part of the Gwadar port and special economic zone. But Michael, one can't help but read between the lines with Pakistan now wanting to revive China's Belt and Road Initiative projects.
Well, as was said before, Pakistan is going through a major economic slump, and it's in a situation where it needs as much as it can get, and it's doing what it typically does when it goes through an economic crisis, and it turns to its small number of allies, of economic partners that it could turn to. We have seen in recent weeks that it's been somewhat successful in securing new pledges from its partners in the Gulf, particularly Saudi Arabia, but it really is hoping to inject some more momentum into CPEC by projecting this idea that it's ready to move into this second phase. But you know what? We've been hearing about this new second phase for many years, which is not a really good sign, quite frankly. For so long, Pakistan has been talking about moving into a new phase, but it's really been hard to get beyond that first phase. And I have to emphasize what your reporter said before. China's concerns about the security situation loom very large here. And as much as Pakistan would like to bring more Chinese projects into Pakistan, it's going to be very difficult to do that, quite frankly, until Beijing is more reassured about the security situation. And for Beijing, that ensures they're seeing that there not be any more attacks on its interest, on its nationals in Pakistan working on projects there.
Right, Pakistan, though, continues to be a key element of China's string of pearls policy to create a sphere of influence around India. Beijing, as we know, stands firmly behind Pakistan in terms of sovereignty and territorial integrity. As far as China is concerned, China's reiterated that military cooperation is at the core of bilateral relations, and they'll jointly maintain the security interests of the two countries and the region as well. But Michael, what's the message India should extract from this?
Well, I mean, quite frankly, I don't think we shouldn't overstate the significance of what we're talking about right now. The fact that Pakistan is looking for more. Again, Islamabad is going to be very cautious about how far it goes. It's one thing to put out the very strong and happy rhetoric. I think that the prime minister wants to bank on his party's close relations with the Chinese government. It was, of course, Nawaz Sharif that launched CPEC back in the day. And I think it's important for domestic political reasons for Islamabad to be projecting confidence and to be projecting this message of that we're going to make this work with China. But Pakistan has to be very careful. It cannot afford to take on many more loans and exacerbate its debt problems. So I think that for India, for New Delhi, the major takeaway here is not to read too much into this. I really don't think that we're going to see a newfound momentum in this CPEC project as much as Pakistan and China would like to see that.
Right. Also, Michael, some experts argue that for Pakistan, China is a low-cost, high-value deterrent against India. Does your perception align with this argument?
Well, I mean, absolutely. One big reason why the China-Pakistan relationship is what it is that both countries are keen to work with each other to counter India. I mean, that's always been one of the major focal points and points of strength for this relationship, to sort of come together and see each other as working together to push back against India. That's going to continue, and I think that's why, despite some of the tensions that have crept into China-Pakistan relations because of the slowdown in CPEC and because of the security concerns for China and Pakistan, that shared interest in countering India is going to keep this relationship very strong for quite some time.
Right, Michael, thank you so much, as always, for joining us on The World 24/7 with clearer insight into the matter. The other crucial story we're tracking, well, competent authorities are investigating the death of a member of an Egyptian security team in a shooting near the Rafah border zone. This is what Egypt's military spokesperson has said. Israel's military said it was also investigating reports of an exchange of fire between Israeli and Egyptian soldiers near the crossing between Egypt and the besieged Gaza Strip. Now, as you know, Egypt and Israel signed a peace treaty back in 1979 and have cooperated since then on security issues, especially around the border between Egypt and Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel has faced surging international criticism over its war with Hamas, with even some of its closest allies, particularly the United States, expressing outrage at civilian deaths. Israel insists it adheres to international law, even as it faces scrutiny in the world's top courts, one of which last week demanded that it halt the offensive in Rafah. Israel said it was looking into the civilian deaths after it struck a Hamas installation and killed 2 senior militants there. The deadly fire that tore through an encampment in Rafah on Sunday came at a particularly delicate time for Israel, just days after the International Court of Justice appeared to order the country's military to halt its offensive in Rafah, and as diplomats were aiming to restart negotiations for a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Now, we can share with you that at least 45 civilians, including children, were killed by the blast and by the fires it set off. This is what the Gaza Health Ministry has said. And the ministry said that about 249 people were wounded.
ברפיח כבר פינינו כמיליון תושבים בלתי מעורבים. ולמרות המאמץ העליון שלנו שלא לפגוע בבלתי מעורבים, קרתה לצערנו אמש תקלה טרגית. אנחנו חוקרים את המקרה, אנחנו נסיק את המסקנות, כי זו המדיניות שלנו.
Bugüne kadar 36 binden fazla Filistinli kardeşimizi şehit eden soykırımcı caniler dün de güvenli bölge ilan ettikleri Rafah'ta bulunan bir mülteci kampındaki sivillerin üzerinde füze ve bomba yağdırmışlardır. Uluslararası Adalet Divanı'nın saldırıları durdurma çağrısının ardından gerçekleşen bu katliam terör devletinin kanlı ve kalleş yüzünü bir kez daha ifşa etmiştir.
My colleague Mohammed Ghazali has been tracking the latest updates for us. He joins us live at the moment. Ghazali, with international condemnation mounting, Mr. Netanyahu has still given no sign of curbing the Israeli offensive in Rafah, right?
Yes, and you see the developments in the last 24 hours, the clash between Egyptian and Israeli forces leading to the death of one of the Egyptian soldiers there. And then this global outcry, even France, Germany's vice chancellor, then you have US also saying that we'll try to assess that what happened on the ground. But there are 2 takeaways from here. One, that global outcry at least forced Netanyahu to come out and say that perhaps it was a mistake. But his own statements before this attack took place suggest somewhere that there is some kind of foul play over there, because Joe Biden has time and again said that there is certain red line which Israel should not cross. But in the developments which is happening in Rafah, doesn't seem that there is any red line so far, because 45 people have been killed, and they were killed in the same camp or in the same area where Israel had perhaps declared that that was safe for those people who were displaced in Rafah due to the ongoing invasion. And then also the other impact it could be, because all those countries which are involved in the mediation talks for the hostage deal have also shown their reservations. Qatar's external affairs ministry there issued a very strong statement that perhaps Netanyahu or Israel's planned attack in Rafah will also hamper the mediation talks between Hamas, Israel, and mediated by Egypt or Qatar. So 2 important countries upset due to this attack will perhaps somewhere force Israel to hold their horses as far as attacks are concerned. But we'll have to see whether US will take any concrete action, because US and UK have been giving support or backing Israel in their every operation. It has merely been a lip service since this war has begun, that how Israel has been accused by multiple aid agencies, multiple humanitarian organizations of violating human rights violations in this ongoing war.
As always, Ghazali, thank you so much for joining us with the latest information. Well, as they say, history will not only remember those who committed the crimes, but also those who remained silent. Paris actually witnessed one of its largest pro-Palestine marches. This was in response to an Israeli airstrike that triggered a fire and killed 45 people in a tent camp in Rafah. In fact, across many parts of Spain, like Barcelona, Madrid, Valencia, Bilbao and Malaga, people stood with Palestine and condemned Israel's attacks in Rafah. Many people who are protesting say that generations to come will ask why we didn't stop babies being burnt alive. Well, let's turn our attention now to the United States, where at least 23 people have been killed in a series of powerful storms that swept across the central and southern US. That's left a trail of destruction and devastation, as you can see on your screens. The storms caused deaths in the US states of Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas and Kentucky, just north of an oppressive early season heatwave setting records from South Texas to Florida. Now, all told, over 120 million are under extreme weather alerts in the US, concentrated over the East Coast, where officials are urging people to take precautions. The severe thunderstorms and deadly twisters, meanwhile, have spawned during a historically bad season for tornadoes, at a time when climate change contributes to the severity of storms around the world. By the way, April had the second highest number of tornadoes on record as far as the United States is concerned. And let's turn our attention to the United Kingdom now, where British opposition leader Keir Starmer made his first major speech of the UK election campaign, telling undecided voters that they can trust his Labour Party to safeguard the UK's economy, borders as well as security. Mr. Starmer is the favourite to win the July 4th election, with polls giving Labour a double-digit lead over the governing Conservatives under Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Here's a special report by Sky News political editor Bath Rugby.
At a parish hall in a Tory territory, Keir Starmer setting out his stall.
We're in Sussex, which is a beautiful part of the world, a part I know pretty well.
Today is all about showing you who he is. Working class, relatable, familiar with struggle.
It wasn't easy for us. My dad was a toolmaker. He worked in a factory all of his life. My mum was a nurse, but for most of her life, she had a debilitating illness.
You may have heard this before, but the party strategists think the electorate are still asking, who is this potential PM and what does he stand for?
The answer to that question, the only answer, the working people of this country delivering on their aspirations, earning their respect, serving their interests. And I know that people are looking at this election, looking at me personally. So I make this promise. I will fight for you.
Keen to shed the lefty lawyer elite image that some might have.
Hi, nice to see you.
Perhaps the sight of Sir Keir drinking cups of tea against a backdrop of Union Jack bunting will become a familiar sight. These visuals are all about showing Keir Starmer's roots. You use this speech to talk personally about what shaped you,
yes,
to better explain your politics. You said a while ago, voters are entitled to ask who you are and where you come from, but you don't like it. What's difficult about that for you?
Well, because a lot of my sort of formative years were about issues like my mum being very ill, very personal, difficult. I spent many hours in high dependency units with my mum, not knowing whether she was going to make it through. As a teenager, I found that really hard. I found it really, really hard. And you may think, other people may think that's the easiest thing to go on national television and talk about. For me, it wasn't. It was really difficult.
Your sister Katie actually said, I've always been quite open about my feelings. Keir's good at most things, but not that.
I think she's probably spot on. She knows me pretty well.
The PM in the southeast too, trying to tackle the seat of Chesham and Amersham back off the Lib Dems. But this leader looking increasingly out of control.
It's not exactly the ideal start to this campaign for you, is it? Frankly.
I've been out and about across the entire United Kingdom. Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, been in East Midlands and West Midlands here in the South East. And there's a clear contrast in choice at this election. It's another day. We've had another speech from Keir Starmer, who you've just asked me about. Another half-hour speech. Not a single new idea. right, is taking the British public for granted. I don't think this election is a foregone conclusion. We're going to have a debate over the next few weeks, and I'm the one that's putting bold ideas on the table.
But less than a week into the campaign, Sunak really struggling with the team. Outgoing Tory MP for Telford, Lucy Allen, suspended from the Conservatives today after backing the rival Reform candidate in her old seat.
That is the secure future that I'm going to fight for every day of this election, and with your support, we are going to fight to win.
Two leaders setting out their battle lines, Starmer's all about change, Sunak promising a secure future. Which one will you choose to trust?
Well, China is making a fresh diplomatic push in the Middle East to counter the United States' influence there. Leaders of Egypt, Bahrain, Tunisia and the United Arab Emirates are set to meet with Chinese leader Xi Jinping in Beijing this week, with Palestine and the war in Gaza likely high on the agenda. China will host the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, as well as a number of other Arab leaders in Beijing, and the leaders will, from Tuesday to Saturday, pay state visits to China and attend the opening ceremony of the 10th Ministerial Conference of the China-Arab States Cooperation Forum. Also among the delegation will be Bahrain's king, the Tunisian president, and the United Arab Emirates president, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. Experts say Beijing could also try to seal a long-sought free trade deal with Gulf states. We'll wait to hear on that. But China has adopted a relatively muted stance on the Israel-Hamas war and strikes in the Red Sea, but it has become increasingly assertive on global issues, the European Council on Foreign Relations wrote this week. The wars in Ukraine and Gaza have reinforced the narratives of a declining Western-led order, leading Gulf nations to consider diversifying their ties. As always, news and updates continue. We're going to take a quick break for now. Welcome back. North Korea has said its attempt to put a second spy satellite into orbit failed when the rocket it was on exploded. The admission actually came late on Monday after South Korea's military reported the launch of an unidentified projectile. An initial analysis suggested that the cause was the newly developed liquid fuel rocket motor, but other possible causes were also being investigated as per the report. Japan's defense ministry has condemned North Korea's attempt to put the spy satellite into orbit. In fact, we have a reaction. Listen in.
失敗の可能性を含め、詳細については日米間において、現在分析中であります。
Earlier, the South Korean Air Force held drills in response to North Korea's announcement that it plans to launch a satellite. In fact, about 20 jet fighters, including F-35A and F-15K, participated in this drill in a show of force.